Good morning and welcome to the Wheatley Institution's Constitution Day Forum with Senator Mitt Romney and Utah Governor Spencer Cox. My name is Paul Edwards. I'm the director of the Wheatley Institution here at Brigham Young University. We are really grateful to have you with us today. 1 year ago today, we had online a wonderful forum with Rabbi Lord Jonathan Sacks as the Truman G. Madsen speaker last year. He passed away a month later. His presentation with us was his last public appearance. And I think there's a difference though, Senator. And here's the big difference is I was going to say that we are doing that all online, and we are so grateful to be back in person. And so today's Constitution Day event will be very different, and the outcome will be great. We're so grateful for the support of so many on campus. We have an amazing campus community that makes these things come together. Too many individuals to name, but what a team we have here at BYU to pull these events off. Thank you, everyone. I want to acknowledge President Worthen and Sister Peggy Worthen. We're so grateful to have you here. We also have several members of our President's Council with us today, and we appreciate the good work that you do, your leadership and service here. We're grateful to have with us members of the Wheatley family. So we have John and Diane with us today, and Charles and Caleb Wheatley. The Wheatley Institution is named in the honor of their parents, Jack and Mary Lois Wheatley, who with quiet dignity consecrated so much of their time and their treasure and their talents to the enormous improvement of this campus and church educational efforts around the world. I think it's appropriate to provide a BYU thank you to the Wheatley family for their ongoing leadership and generosity. Also with us, Judge Thomas Griffith recently stepped down from the U.S. Court of Appeals for the District of Columbia. Judge Griffith, our newest Wheatley Fellow, is also giving a Constitution Day lecture later today at the Harold B. Lee Library Auditorium, 3 p.m., and I hope that you'll be able to join all of us there. I see in the audience our former governor, Gary Herbert. We're so grateful to have you with us today. And I look around, we have too many dignitaries for me to name individually, but there are two individuals that I do really need to pay special recognition to. So unless you've seen this close up, it is hard to comprehend the burden that's borne by the families of our public servants. Mrs. Ann Romney and First Lady Abby Cox, we are so grateful for your grit, for your goodness and your grace, and we are very honored to have you with us today. I have asked Judge Griffith to offer an invocation, and then I will announce the remainder of the program.
Our Father in heaven, it's with deep gratitude that we gather together today to thank Thee for the blessings which are ours. We're grateful for the Constitution of the United States and this great land. Father, we are in a difficult time, and we need Thy help. Contempt reigns everywhere. Polarization is deep. We're grateful for BYU and for the Wheatley Institution for providing a place where we can gather together and discuss important ideas and do so civilly and do so with respect for one another. We're grateful for Senator Romney and Governor Cox and ask Thy blessing upon them as we ask Thy blessing upon all our public servants and our political leaders and our and our citizenry, that the divisions that plague us now, that we'll find ways to overcome them, that we will find ways to treat one another with dignity and respect while we argue and debate great and important ideas. We love thee, we love thy Son, we praise him, we pray that all that we do may reflect the gratitude we feel to him, and we pledge to thee, Father, our best efforts that we will be agents of reconciliation in this difficult time, and we do so in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen.
Thank you, Judge Griffith. With today's forum, the Wheatley Institution inaugurates a campus-wide initiative on the U.S. Constitution. This initiative will bring together students and faculty, and it will help us to deepen our understanding of the core principles of constitutionalism and also try to address the very serious challenges that face our constitutional order in the 21st century. 3 new Wheatley Fellows are going to help guide this effort. Stephanie Barclay, Associate Professor of Law at Notre Dame School of Law, Justin Collings, Associate Dean of the J. Reuben Clark Law School here at BYU, and Judge Griffith. Seminars similar to this are going to be held each month at 11 a.m. here in the Hinckley Center. So if you're a BYU student interested in participating in that effort, and we're so glad to have so many of you here, there's a green card that can be found on your seat. Take a moment, scribble out your name and email, and pass it to the end of the row, and we'd love to see that you're regularly invited to those events. If you're watching online, send us an email, Wheatley_institution@byu.edu. Now, to today's forum. Senator Mitt Romney will address us, and following his remarks, Governor Cox will engage in a conversation, and that conversation will include questions from you. Hopefully you found at your chair not just a green card, but a blue note card. The blue note card's for your questions. As Senator Romney concludes his remarks, please pass your written questions, put your name, what you're studying, and the ushers will see that those get to me, and we'll see that we get them up to Governor Cox for that discussion. Now, a little logistical item here. When the forum concludes at around 11:50, please remain in your seats until Senator Romney, Governor Cox, and specially invited members of President Worthen's party have exited the Assembly Hall. And that's essentially this front row and these 2 rows over here. Now, normally, I would introduce our guests sequentially, but because of today's format, I'll first introduce today's moderator, Governor Cox. Governor Cox was inaugurated earlier this year as Utah's 18th governor. Cox was born and raised in the small town of Fairview, Utah, and upon returning home from his mission to Mexico for the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, Cox married his high school sweetheart, Abby Palmer. Best decision of his life. Cox studied at Snow College. He graduated with top honors from Utah State University in political science, and then he went on to earn his law degree from Washington and Lee University in Lexington, Virginia. After a few years of law practice in Salt Lake City, the Cox family returned to the family farm in Fairview, and Spencer became vice president for Centricom, a regional telecommunications company. He also jumped right into public service in a big way, first as city councilor, then as city mayor, then as county commissioner, then as a state legislator. When Governor Herbert needed to find a new lieutenant governor in 2013, he found in Spencer Cox the integrity, the intelligence, and the experience to serve with great distinction as Herbert's second lieutenant governor. Cox's empathic politics stand in bright contrast to the divisiveness of our times. I've been with our governor in the face of floods and fires. I've seen him effectively work through very complex technical, jurisdictional, legal, and political complexities with tough issues like homelessness and this current pandemic. I can attest that no sitting governor in the United States is better prepared to mobilize and manage in a crisis, and no governor works as carefully to understand the heartfelt concerns of his citizens as Spencer Cox. Please join me in providing a welcome to Spencer Cox. Now, on to our speaker, who is one of Brigham Young's most distinguished graduates and one of its most generous benefactors. Mitt Romney's represented Utah in the United States Senate since 2019. Romney was born in the not-so-small town of Detroit, Michigan, and upon returning from his mission in France for the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, Romney married his high school sweetheart, Ann Davies. Also a very great decision, and I think you'll see a pattern there. Romney studied at Stanford. He graduated from BYU with a degree in English and went on to earn a joint law degree and MBA from Harvard. So which part of Romney's life, his storied life, should we highlight? His analytically driven success in private equity, his turnaround prowess for the Salt Lake City 2002 Winter Olympic Games, his fiscal prudence and policy innovations as governor of Massachusetts, or maybe his dignified candidacies, campaigns for the US presidency. How about his consecrated service for his church? His fidelity to family? Each one of these could represent chapters in what's going to be an extraordinary biography. Senator, you know that this beautiful alumni and visitor center where we meet today honors the legacy of President Gordon B. Hinckley. This very podium, like the one in the conference center, is crafted from walnut that came from a tree in President Hinckley's yard. President Hinckley taught, with emphasis, we need people who are honest, who are willing to stand up for decency, truth, integrity, morality, and law and order, who respond to their consciences even when it's unpopular to do so, perhaps when it's especially unpopular to do so. Senator Romney, because of your willingness to stand up for decency, truth, integrity, morality, and law, especially when unpopular to do so, your life of accomplishment, service, and leadership does even greater lasting honor to the legacy of President Hinckley than this extraordinary building named in his honor. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming Senator Romney to the podium.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for that kind introduction. We're fortunate to have the governor here. We're fortunate to have a very good governor for our very good state, to have our former governor here also, Judge Griffith. Thank you also, President Worthen, and your dear wife for being here. And I see many other wonderful friends, and I appreciate the chance to be with you today. I appreciate the honor of being asked to speak at my alma mater. Especially after such a big week. It's a great week to be a Cougar, all right? The school looks different than when I was in school here. I know I look different as well. I haven't minded getting older, but my body isn't taking it very well. Sometimes I long for those simpler days when bread was good for you and we hadn't heard of kale yet. Today, we address the Constitution. Truthfully, I didn't give much thought to the Constitution when I was here. And even in law school, I thought my constitutional law class was just one more subject to pass. Studying history more thoroughly, however, and reading the works of the founders and traveling to dozens of other countries has changed that. Our Constitution was a far more dramatic departure from history than I had appreciated. From the beginning of humanity, history was characterized by some strong man assembling muscle from collaborators that would then dominate, rule, and generally oppress others. They were the feudal lord, the czar, Caesar, pharaoh, warlord, chief, emperor, king, all authoritarians, most of them tyrants. I have a chart in my office that traces the military and economic might of civilizations from 2000 BC until today. And over 4,000 years of human history, dominating civilizations have come and gone. The Egyptians, Greeks, Assyrians, Babylonians, Persians, Mongolians, Romans, Chinese, and even the British. Only a few short-lived sparks of democracy intrude on a virtually uninterrupted flow of authoritarian domination. Now, why am I telling you this? Because authoritarianism is the default setting of human history. And knowing history as they did, some of our founders may have wondered whether to include some form or some aspects of authoritarianism in our governmental structure in order to improve the likelihood that the nation would survive. After all, America's geographic isolation and the potential to someday build a robust military could have made that a credible option. But the founders wanted something more than just national survival. They wanted the people of America to enjoy life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. They believed earnestly that God had endowed every person with unalienable rights. They believed that all persons were created equal in the sight of God. Throughout history, autocracies, on the other hand, had oppressed people and had denied people these fundamental rights. So the founders worked assiduously to escape the perilous attraction of authoritarianism. But authoritarianism, as you probably know, was not the only peril they feared. They also feared what I'll call pure democracy. James Madison described such pure or unfettered democracies as, quote, spectacles of turbulence and contention, incompatible with personal security, of the rights of property, and have in general been as short in their lives as they've been violent in their deaths. I think John Adams expressed it best. He said this, quote, remember, democracy never lasts long. It soon wastes and exhausts and murders itself. There never was a democracy yet that did not commit suicide. This is John Adams. It is in vain to say that democracy is less vain, less proud, less selfish, less ambitious, or less avaricious than aristocracy or monarchy. It's not true, and nowhere appears in history. Those passions are the same in all men, and when unchecked, produce the same effects of fraud, violence, and cruelty. Individuals have conquered themselves. Nations and large bodies of men never. So the founders' task and brilliance was crafting a system of government that would thread the needle between the two perils that had doomed every human civilization for 4,000 years. Autocracy on one side and pure runaway democracy on the other. And this they accomplish in ways in which we're all familiar. 3 separate but equal branches of government, an electoral college to elect the president, 2 senators from each state, regardless of state population, lifetime appointments for members of the judiciary, the primacy of certain state powers except for specific narrowly enumerated federal powers. Now, I acknowledge that some of the constitutional provisions to safeguard against pure democracy have eroded since the founding, but most do in fact endure. What the founders crafted, therefore, was not just elegant in design, it was a radical departure from history. Note the uncertainty for the nation's future, which was expressed by Benjamin Franklin in response to a purported question. He said he had created, or they had created, a republic if you can keep it. And that concern was shared by his colleagues and countrymen. A nation by, for, and of the people had never long survived. It's important to note that the founders did not craft a final perfect union. They instead said they crafted a way for the American people to build a more perfect union. And so institutions and norms were in fact built over the ensuing decades. The sin of slavery was eventually eradicated. The first president voluntarily transferred power to his successor. The Supreme Court established the power of judicial review. The departments of the executive branch were created. Rules and procedures were adopted by each of the three branches of government. And through our Constitution and the institutions and norms that followed, the nation has avoided these two shoals, the shoal of authoritarianism and that of pure democracy that the founders feared. We have threaded the needle, if you will. Now, during my adolescence, the world was divided between two competing systems. As you know, Russian-led authoritarianism and American-led liberal democracy. And true to historic precedent, the authoritarian competitor sought to conquer its competition through the use of force rather than through persuasion. Growing up, as Ann and I did in the 50s and 60s, we experienced a shadow of fear. We actually did have those infamous drills in school where you got under your desk for protection from possible Soviet bomb blasts. In my science class, we had a scale model of the Soviet satellite, Sputnik. It hung on the ceiling above our heads, reminding us that the Russians would be able to watch and attack us from space. There was a little ditty we used to sing. Button up your overcoat, put your goggles on, close your eyes when you realize it's an atom bomb. I mean, I tried to convince my dad to build a bomb shelter in our backyard. We actually scoped it out together one afternoon, but in the end, he demurred. Many of you can't conceive of the relief the lifting of that oppressing cloud was when the Soviet Union fell. History was over. Liberal democracy had won. Russia was going to emulate the West. China began to open up its economy. We even began to dismantle parts of our own military. Unfortunately, history has reasserted itself with vengeance. And I say with vengeance for two reasons. First, because the authoritarians of today are a good deal stronger relative to us than was the Soviet Union of the last century. And second, because America's resolve to hew to the constitutional bulwarks against authoritarianism on the one side and pure democracy on the other is less certain. Now, I'm sure you recognize, as I do, that authoritarianism is in its ascendancy in the world. Freedom House reports that liberal democracies have been in a decade-long decline. This is quite a reversal from what I'd expected. Not many years ago, we thought that China would ultimately become democratic as it adopted capitalism and joined the G20. We cheered as Russia held elections. Then the only poster boys for authoritarianism were the little chubby guy with the bad haircut in North Korea and the septuagenarian revolutionary in Cuba. Today, China censors its media, shreds its promise of self-rule for the people of Hong Kong, oppresses minorities, and even people of faith. Chinese leaders, did you know, insist that crosses be removed from churches in China and be replaced with the Chinese flag. The national anthem of China is sung at all church services. Church officials have to be approved by the government. And the only legal Bible that can be purchased in China is one that has been rewritten by the government. China is carrying out genocide against its largest minority. Nearly 1 million Uyghurs have been imprisoned in concentration camps, complete with brainwashing and forced labor. Children are separated from parents, and when the fathers are taken, Han Chinese men are sent into the home to monitor their wives. Sexual assault and forced sterilizations are common. What the Chinese Communist Party is perpetrating against the Uyghur people is atrocity not seen or imagined coming from a nation in our era. Russia's Putin actually murders his political opponents. Opposition leader Alexei Navalny was, after an unsuccessful assassination attempt, as you know, was subjected to a sham trial and subsequently jailed. Dissenters Boris Nemtsov and Sergei Magnitsky were both assassinated. Venezuela's Maduro brutalizes the citizens that have not already fled. Assad has killed hundreds of thousands of his citizens in Syria. And sadly, the Taliban flag flies above the presidential palace in Afghanistan. What's even more surprising than the appalling brutality of the authoritarian regimes is their relative economic and military strength. Russia's expanded and modernized its nuclear arsenal at great cost. Today, it's not only larger than ours, it's more advanced. China's Navy is larger than ours and has been specifically designed to defeat ours. Its space weapon, missile, and nuclear weapon programs are in high gear. Now, you know, military might is limited by a nation's economic might. The communism of the old Soviet Union was simply unable to keep pace with the robust strength of capitalism in the West. But China jettisoned Marxism and much of socialism and has adopted a form of capitalism. China's economy will surpass ours within the next 10 years. Measured by purchase power parity, it's already larger. And given China's population, its economy will eventually be much larger than ours. GDP, as you know, is a product of two things: the size of a nation's workforce and the output per worker. More Chinese workers will mean a much larger GDP. And China has made it clear it intends to be the economic, military, and geopolitical leader of the world. So yeah, today's autocracies, led by China, are becoming stronger. But at the same time, our resolve to follow the Constitution's path, avoiding the perils of authoritarianism on one hand, and pure democracy on the other, that's wavering. Now, no more stunning evidence of that was the attempt to prevent the lawful and constitutional transfer of power on January 6th. It followed from the President of the United States claiming that the election had been stolen from him. His purported evidence spun from pillar to post, from counterfeit ballots imported from China, to stuffed ballot boxes, to dead voters, to voting machines manipulated from some far-off place. Even more recently, a prominent TV pundit traveled to Hungary to extol Viktor Orban as a model for us to emulate. Orban censors the media in his country, ignores the will of the people in elections, amasses wealth for himself and his cronies. Hungary is ranked as one of the least free, least democratic countries in the developed world. Hungary, a model for America? As I was running for Senate, I held a number of town meetings. In one, a woman asked me if I would vote to remove NBC, CBS, and ABC from the air. I said, no, of course. And I presumed that she had a point she was going to make about something I'd said. But no, her point was simply that they should not be allowed on TV. She said the networks like that said things that were wrong and they should be shut down. And I've since learned that her perspective is not as singular as I had imagined. Constitutional and institutional guardrails are under less obvious but just as real challenges in Washington. Politicians claim to try and get rid of the Electoral College. Many of my Democratic colleagues want to pack the Supreme Court, the logic apparently being that whoever has the majority in Congress should be able to conform the court to its own political philosophy. The court would therefore cease to be a separate and equal branch and instead become a subsidiary partisan branch. Now, the same sentiment applies to the effort to eliminate the filibuster. By the way, despite its name, it's not really a rule about senators giving interminable speeches. It's a rule that requires 60 votes for major legislation to pass through the Senate. Accordingly, compromise between two parties is required for a bill to pass, and this in turn gives the minority a voice and a certain measure of power, and therefore it slows things down. Madison actually explained that the Senate would serve as a necessary fence against the fickleness and passion that often influenced the public and the House of Representatives. Washington is said to have described the Senate as a saucer that cooled legislation passed out of the House, like a saucer catches hot tea that overflows from a cup. Since its early history, Senate rules have therefore allowed unlimited debate. The filibuster rule has been a cornerstone of the institution for nearly 2 centuries. Eliminating it would forever change one of the key institutions of our republic, one that checks the power of the majority and preserves the influence of the minority. Doing so would draw us closer and closer to the shoal of pure democracy. With the economic and military power of autocratic China and Russia increasing, and American resolve to avoid authoritarianism and pure democracy declining, freedom itself, the right of every person to enjoy life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, is in the balance. What is required of us who love freedom and the Constitution and America? First, our leaders in Washington must take action to prevent China from continuing to build its economic might through predatory means, through practices that violate the rules of international trade and order. China must not be allowed to continue to steal intellectual property. It must not be allowed to massively subsidize industries that then bankrupt the Western companies that abide by international rules. It must not be allowed to monopolize key raw materials. Now, the United States alone isn't able to enforce those kinds of restrictions. Our economy is simply not large enough to discipline China's malevolent behavior. It's imperative, therefore, that we join forces with other nations like us that abide by the rules of international order to clearly establish accepted practices and deny access to our markets to China if it flaunts them. But there's also work to do here at home. Among many other things, we've got to modernize our military. We need to endeavor to make our businesses more successful and more competitive. We should invest a great deal more in emerging technologies. One commentator has truthfully said this. He said, every bill before Congress should be evaluated by whether or not it strengthens America versus China. Every bill. Now, one more thing. For all of us here, please excuse a personal reference to my faith, but the founder of my religion is purported to have said that the Constitution of the United States would someday, quote, hang, as it were, by a thread. Further, that the elders of the church would save it. Now, they didn't have tape recorders back then or smartphones, and I'm not sure at all that he actually said that. But if you will allow me some literary license, I'd suggest that this sentiment may apply to all of us, not just to a few Latter-day Saint elders. We can help, if you will, thread the needle between authoritarianism on one side and rampant pure democracy on the other by exercising what the founders called public virtues, listening respectfully to the opinions of others, expanding our sources of information beyond those we agree with, defending the entire Constitution rather than just the parts of it we like, voting for men and women of character and probity, and acknowledging that there's a great deal that we just don't know. The founders gave us a republic. As Benjamin Franklin said, it's up to us to keep it. I sure hope we will. Thank you so much. Thanks, buddy. Thank you.
Well, Senator, thank you so much for those inspiring and passionate words. As you know, we have some questions from the audience that will be collected, are being collected now, and we have a few minutes to ask those questions. So I get to ask the first question, and I have a few, but I'll try to do that quickly because I'd rather get to the audience. And by the way, I won't ask where you were speaking before this.
I was speaking at the place that lost the football game last week.
Okay, good. We just want to get that out of the way. So let's start here. In your speech today, you mentioned institution and norms, and how important they are to our country. A nation of laws. Much has been written about that we can't pass a law for everything, right? We need those institutions and norms. Yuval Levine has very persuasively argued that those institutions are what make America different and special and help define us, and yet those institutions are waning. My question to you is, the institutions that you've referenced here, other institutions like faith-based institutions, the institution of the family, volunteer organizations, all of these different, not to mention the constitutional institutions that you brought up today. How do we get back to rebuilding those institutions that seem to be failing us or that we're failing?
I don't know that I have a great answer to that, because that's one of the great issues of our time. And I'll just underscore what you said there, which is we thought that, by the way, going to other countries and having a vote there would create a democracy. It does not. Democracy requires not just a vote, but it requires those institutions to be strong. And what we've seen from political leaders on both sides of the aisle is a continuous attack on our institutions, whether it's the Justice Department, the FBI, the courts themselves, it goes on and on. The intelligence community, the military. It seems that there is no entity that is spared from attack, and there will of course be in any entity there'll be people who are being human, who make mistakes, bad mistakes, and need to be punished. But the institutions that we have in this country still are the model for the world. And I think it's only incumbent on those of us who are in positions of having a platform not to avail ourselves to attack institutions, but instead preserve the institution, attack the individual, the policy, but preserve the institution. Because attacking these institutions very much threatens the capacity of America to continue to be an umbrella for democracy and freedom around the world.
Thank you. You talked about these kind of dualities of authoritarianism and pure democracy on the one side. You mentioned January 6th and what we're seeing on that side. Can you talk a little bit more about the pure democracy push and how that's influencing politics today? And
well, the whole idea of a republic, as you know, is that the voting electorate would choose men and women to represent us, and these people would exercise their own judgment in fashioning policy, recognizing, of course, that it's for instance, should we be trading with Taiwan, and how should we trade with Taiwan? Well, that's not something the general public is going to be aware of. So you hopefully elect capable people, and they do a lot of work and analysis and learn from people smarter than themselves, and make some policy decisions that are good for all of us. That's how our system's to work. But what's increasingly happening is that people that are getting elected are performers. And I don't mean that, I'm not trying to criticize Hollywood or people that have better skill than I in performing, but I mean that as, instead of saying, hey, how do we create good policy for the country that may or may not be popular, it seems that people are intent only on doing what's popular and playing to the base of our respective parties. And so I think our Democrat Party is going further and further to one wing, and our Republican Party doing the same. And this kind of performance politics, as opposed to, if you will, being a statesperson that represents what they feel is right for the country, is, I think, one of the challenges that we face at this stage. And I hope that we're able to return to a time when those who we elect often do things we disagree with, and we choose people based upon their character and their capacity, as opposed to just having individuals who think their job is just to somehow look at the polls and do what the polls say. Because simply following the polls turns us into the kind of pure, unfettered democracy that the founders feared, and that's been the peril of democracies in the past.
Thank you. And that will give me an opportunity to put in a plug for Judge Griffith's lecture later today at 3 o'clock. I don't know what he's going to say, but
It'll be a lot smarter than what you heard from me.
If it's anything like anything he said before, everyone needs to be there, because I think he'll pull on some of those threads. Okay, we have some questions here, and I'm going to go through these, and we'll give you a chance to answer. Here we have one. In the 200 years following the introduction of the U.S. Constitution, society, technology, and general circumstances have changed drastically. How do we deal with modern issues that remain unaddressed in the Constitution, and is the Constitution able to guide us in these uncharted areas?
You should know, by the way, that that's the argument that China makes when we speak with their leaders. And that is that, and I'm just not talking about what they send out in propaganda. I'm talking about when you have a sit down with a Chinese leader, they say, you can't keep up in today's world. In the world of high technology, a democratic system with the kinds of checks and balances that you have and so forth simply can't keep up. And that an authoritarian regime like China's is the way forward. And they're selling that model to other nations successfully, because other nations are adopting authoritarianism. And of course, they sell it in part to a very willing audience, because the person in charge loves the idea of saying, hey, no more elections, I'll be in charge forever. That's an easy sell. And that's the great challenge that we have. What do I believe? I do believe that our Constitution provides ample opportunity for us to adjust our institutions as necessary to meet the challenges of today. And I mean, when the Constitution was written, there was no provision, for instance, for the Department of the Interior, or for the State Department, or for the Treasury, or the Justice Department. These were, one after the other, established by our early presidents. I mean, we didn't have departments. How in the world was the government going to work without agencies and departments? It was not in the Constitution, but the method is there for that to be created. We have the capacity to create whatever structures are necessary. What we are lacking is the political will, in some respects, to take action on the biggest issues of our time. And in my opinion, the three big issues we face are the emergence of China as the world's dominant player, and what that means to all of us. All right, that's number one. Number two, in my opinion, is the changing climate that we have, how we're going to deal with that. And number three is the massive debt we have as a nation. And those three big issues we're really not dealing with. And it is not a matter of our structure doesn't allow it. It's instead people of capacity have not exercised the political will to take on the big issues. I hope that changes.
Sobering, thank you. Let's talk about federalism for just a second. Sorry, this isn't a question. This is me being a governor, and governors love to talk about federalism. What role do you see? Obviously, the intent, you talked about Madison and some of his writings, that there was an intent. Governor Herbert, this is something that he cared deeply about, this idea that states would be the laboratories of democracy, that's where we would make the gains, and then the federal government would come along. That's certainly been skewed over time. I think the federal government has gotten much bigger, much more important in the eyes of the world and in the eyes of politicians in D.C. Any thoughts as a former governor and now in this role on how federalism can help in some of these areas?
Well, this goes back to the authoritarianism concern I described, which is one of the ways that the founders avoided authoritarianism was keeping power dispersed, not just with the three separate but equal branches in Washington, but by having power in the states as well. And so you dispersed power throughout our system so it could not be grabbed by one person or one party and imposed on everybody. And as you take away more and more power from the states, you make us more susceptible to a form of authoritarianism. And I'll just note, I shouldn't be terribly political, but my Democrat friends are promoting something they call the human infrastructure bill. I'm not talking about the solid physical infrastructure that a group of us helped fashion, but no, this so-called human infrastructure, which is $3.5 trillion of new spending. And it has, for instance, 2 years of free pre-K and free community college. Well, guess what? That means the federal government is now going to be doing pre-K and deciding who's authorized to receive those monies, and college. I mean, education has always been a state function, all right? And now it's going to be a federal function, with the federal government getting further and further into it. Expect them to continue to expand. There is always an effort by people in Washington to think we know best and to push aside the states. And that, I think it's a bad idea for a lot of reasons, but one in particular is it again makes us more susceptible to a form of authoritarianism, which is a centralized government that imposes its will on the entire nation.
Thank you. Okay, we've only got about 5 minutes left, so we're going to go to the speed round. Given that the founders believed we needed a well-informed populace to keep and control our republic, how can we as a people stay informed but not misinformed to live up to that mandate?
There was a chart that was on Twitter the other day, I don't know whether you saw it, which is an institute looked at our sources of information in the country and arrayed them whether they're left and right, and then also whether they put out facts or put out opinions and facts that are often wrong. And it was a kind of a bell curve. And in the center were the most reliable sources, like the AP and Reuters and BBC and PBS and some others that were more towards the center, which is more, less opinion, more fact-based, and more accurate. One way we can keep ourselves informed is making sure that among the things we read and watch are those kinds of sources, as opposed to just the sources that are actually more entertaining and fun to watch that happen to agree with us, but they're at the edge and often wrong. And right now, unfortunately, our media has become, our inclination is to watch things we agree with, and to do that either on the networks we watch or on the information we get in social media. And that obviously puts us very much in peril. It is essential that we have a common fact base if we're going to be able to make informed decisions and the people we choose to represent us. So, I am, for a while, those of us on the right were happy to see the New York Times in trouble. But as time went on, we said, not so sure it's a good thing for papers that have editors to be disappearing. And so, yeah, get a subscription. Whether the Deseret News or the Salt Lake Tribune or the New York Times or the Wall Street Journal, but we need editors and people providing information from more reliable sources.
Perfect, thank you. I'm going to ask this one because it says, I appreciate your willingness to open our state to Afghan refugees. I think they're talking about me, but I'm going to ask it anyway. What is the best thing we can do as citizens to help welcome them? So I'm not going to answer this, but I do want your perspective on Afghanistan, what's happening there, and the refugees coming to our country.
That's a big topic. I was one who felt we should not leave Afghanistan, that we should have kept 5,000 troops there to stand up behind the Afghan National Security Forces. They had 200,000 people there. They needed 5,000 of us to keep the planes flying and to provide intelligence. So I would not have pulled out. And by the way, our military agreed with that position. But both President Trump and President Biden decided to pull out. President Biden, the way we got out was obviously catastrophic and has hurt our reputation in the world, our relationship with our friends around the world, has made us a less reliable partner, and tragically resulted in the loss of 13 of our men and women. And so it was, I'm not going to blame precisely. That'll be done over time through Congress, but not a great day in American history. And the fact that we've left people behind, tens of thousands of men and women who worked with us, some green card holders, meaning legal permanent residents in the United States, a few citizens, but a lot of Afghans who worked with us are being left behind. And it's simply a moral stain on our national character.
Very
They're telling
sad.
us to shut up. So
I know, that's the time. So I'm going to do this. We're going to end now, but I need you, it's Constitution Day. We need to end on an optimistic note. What are something positive that you see happening in our country, or that we can get there? Well,
Winston Churchill said it best. He said, you can trust the American people to get things right after they've exhausted all the alternatives. And we're going through some alternatives right now, but fundamentally, we are a very good people. In America's history, we have made some severe mistakes, but we've always made those mistakes out of a belief that we're doing the right thing. And when we've made mistakes, we've acknowledged it. We've made some mistakes recently, but we're a very good people. I'm convinced that the heart of the American people is good and sound, and that we will return to the principles that have allowed us to endure over these many, many years and outlived what people predicted for the life of our republic. I love this country, and I love our future, And I'm absolutely convinced that the Constitution and the principles it provides are what will give us the protection that we need to keep threading the needle and preserve the republic with which we have been blessed. Thanks, you all. Good to be with you.
Ladies and gentlemen, Senator Mitt Romney.
Thanks, my friend.
Congratulations.
Thank you. Thank you.